Welcome to the SoulBodyHorse podcast, where we dive deep into the horse-human connection. Here we believe in the power of stories, in digging deeper, pushing further, and asking the oft-unsaid question. I'm your host, Meredith Crawford. For many, today's guest is someone who needs no introduction. Her name is synonymous with thoracic sling development, and many vets consider her to be an expert on the subject. Meet Celeste Lazaris. You may recall hearing about Celeste from Enya's rehab story and Nikki Charbonneau's journey told in episodes 3 and 4. And to further help contextualize this episode, I am not trained in either Celeste's bodywork method or her rehab method. However, Celeste and I both started off at the same place, the Equine Natural Movement School in Battleground, Washington. Sit tight because this is going to be a great conversation. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just to kick things off, there's a couple burning questions from Enya's rehab story.
Okay.
One of them is just what made her such a great candidate for your work?
That is a beautiful question, one that is very layered. I will do my best to answer that in a way that does Enya justice, and Nikki. And I probably won't, but I will try. When I go out to do a session on a horse, first things that I do when I'm going out to work on the horse is I do some animal communication with them and just kind of give a heads up like, hey, I'm coming. You know, your owner's clued me in on a few things. Here's some things. And I kind of just introduce myself before I get there. And that seems to really kind of take the walls down quicker, so I can kind of just get in and get right to work. And I build some rapport with them. And so when I first clued in with Enya, when I was driving down, just overall energy of Enya is very much just like an old queen. Like this mare is 10,000 years old. I'm quite convinced. And she was just so ready. Totally like, yes, I've heard of you. Excited that you're coming down. Let's get this, not let's get this over with, but like, yes, like I'm ready to kind of get to work. And I was like, okay, well, this is really cool. And I was like a little bit intimidated by just her. I just had never quite been around a mare that seemed just as old and as regal as she did. And so I went down and I met Nikki, and Nikki is just the kindest, most sweetest soul. But you could tell that she was tired at that point. She was emotionally tired. And she said that she didn't want to talk about what happened with Enya. She said, I'll let you know what the other body workers have found and what the vet has found and those things, but I don't really want to talk about what happened, particularly not around her. Like, I don't want her around it. It was so beautiful the way that she was protective over her. And usually I really want to know all the ins and outs, like give me the whole story. Same thing for when I'm working on human clients. Like, what direction were you looking at when you got rear-ended? Like, I want to know all the things because I can piece it together better. But I so appreciated how she protected her in that way. And so, I go in, she tells me what she can tell me, and I go in and I start working on Enya. And she was such a perfect candidate for it all because it's like she knew what was wrong with her body and she was so ready to fix it. And she was so ready to work with me. She was so trusting of Nikki. And it was just from the very beginning, it was the most beautiful experience to see like their bond. Every horse that I work on, I say is teaching me because I kind of come to them a little bit on my knees and I'm like, here's some things that I think can help you. Like, please let me know how to do it, how to do it better the whole time. And so they really guided the session. And Enya just guided me through the whole thing and showed me, I offered my offerings and she would say yes to this and no to that and a little bit more of this. And she just, Enya fixed Enya. I didn't do much, but yeah, that's kind of all of the different layers that I can speak to what made her so profound.
Can you walk us through the relationship between the pole and the AOJ and the thoracic sling?
Yeah, there's a lot of different, kind of depends on your vantage point. So in all horses, if they are not fit through the thoracic sling and through their core, that's where their center of balance really should be. And that's why we ride them where we ride them, right? It should be underneath their saddle. And in a lot of horses, when they're not properly developed through the thoracic sling and or when they have some kind of pathologies the way that Enya did, they will default and they will use their pole kind of as now the new lever of their body. So their center of balance should be back here underneath your seat. And when that doesn't work out for whatever reason, it will go up to their pole. You look at those joints, they're not meant to really lever the weight of a horse's body. They can for short term, but they really shouldn't be. And so what had been going on with Enya on top of the damage that she had suffered I think caused a lot of tension in that area. She kind of clamped everything down around there because she wanted to protect that injury. And then because she became slowly out of shape and now she's compromised, when she was trying to go back into work, she couldn't let go of that tension. And so the majority of what she was doing with her movement was she was clamped down in that area. She had no really proper mobility. And it was being made worse because she was using that as a lever in her body. And so even when we kind of started getting back her into riding and training, everything was about calling that energy back. Very moment it would start to go up into there and she would start using that inappropriately as a cane. We were like, okay, full stop. Like, do we have to come back down to a halt? That's okay. Do we need to do a handwork? That's okay. Like, whatever we need to do to say, the minute she would do that, we just use that as our stop signal. Whoa, nope, something has failed. And so by using that and kind of restructuring that, we essentially taught her that she didn't have to use it so much. And so it got a break from that overuse and all of that tension. And then over time, we could actually restore mobility through there instead of it just being, for lack of a better term, kind of, hypertrophy around it, which is not correct. But there's body workers that are listening. If you've worked on a pole area or the OA and there's a lot of trauma there, it's a very specific, it's like a sticky, webby, it doesn't move, almost like there's concrete in the joints instead. And so doing the work to first teach the body that she doesn't have to use it so it can actually take a break, and then going back in when the body was strong enough to support it, then going back in and kind of restoring that range of motion was really key for her.
I can see that. And that's a really great explanation. You got your start as a body worker working with the fascia and tissue, but now your name is really synonymous with nervous system work. At what point did you switch and just say, no, this is about the nervous system instead?
So the human school that I went to specialized in fascia in many different ways, but they really taught about how nerves also run through the fascia. And it was one of those things that, like, I understood it enough that I could pass all the tests, but I didn't integrate it into my system to really understand. What I did understand about nerves, that school was, again, very gifted at, is relieving people that suffer from a lot of nerve compression. So my really big start was with my human clients, was relieving thoracic outlet syndrome in them. And so I have countless studies where people would come to me with these full diagnoses. I'm scheduled for surgery in 3 months. And, I'm just looking for any other option. I can't really afford the surgery. I can't afford the time down. And unless there's a skeletal abnormality, I have never seen that where body work and, homework, posture, those things couldn't fix it. And so, we had thoracic outlet syndrome, we had sciatica, your two main big ones, but on all other areas. So we got very, very skilled at releasing nerves. I went through manipulating fascia, right? So it's like through the manipulation of fascia, through the manipulation of ligaments to kind of help, which, it's almost like a ligament release is similar to chiro, but not. And so if you understand how to release fascia and ligaments, you really can unwind the whole body. And so you can make space for a lot of these common nerve compressions. And so then with the horses, I started seeing the same patterns that I was seeing in the humans, and getting on Google and asking vets and being like, thoracic outlet syndrome, like, that's got to be a thing, right? Like, we have the same thing. Equine sciatica, that has to be a thing. And I just was coming up on blanks. I wasn't finding anything, but that didn't mean that it wasn't real, right? And so I ended up using my human techniques on the horses for those pathologies, and it would work. And those side effects, their symptoms would go away. And I was like, man, this has got to be a thing. And now we know that it is a thing because people like Audrey DeClue, and there's other people now that are out doing it. But as soon as I started really realizing that it was the nerves that I was releasing, I was like, this is something that we need to start talking about. And so I just started being annoying and just saying nerves about all of these things, because I wanted people to be like, hello, there's head shaking syndrome in horses. I fix it all the time. It takes sometimes 2 or 3 sessions max, and it's done. Goes away. That doesn't mean that there's not cases where there's actual nerve damage. And I do agree that there are some things that are way outside the scope of what fascial help can do, but it's so common that it needs to be talked about. So I started talking about that. And then as I developed the pillar system that I have, the balanced movement method system, what I found through working with several equine behaviorists is that these particular muscles, so that we can get a nerve release out of it, what's also going on along with that is that we're releasing the vagus nerve, and we're dealing with the whole nervous system as a whole, and the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system and all these crazy things. And so, the last 2 years, I've really been diving down into that. It is all so beautifully connected. I would say it was about 2 years ago when that really shifted over for talking about the nervous system as a whole. talking about nerves, I've probably been annoying people with that for at least 5 years now.
Was there a specific horse or group of horses you were working on at the beginning where the light bulb just clicked and you said, okay, this is fascia?
At the time, I was working at a lot of big competition barns, and they were having me come up to work on their horses about every 2 weeks because it was a really good Band-Aid. And there was a couple horses that would not be sound unless I worked on them every 2 weeks. And in the beginning, it was almost like a little ego brush. You're like, oh, like I'm not good, blah, blah, blah. The problem with that, though, is that I'm a owner and I was a competitive trainer and rider before I was a body worker. And so I had like the little body worker ego stroke. And then I was like, the equine owner trainer picked up and I was like, oh, why is the horse sound or not sound unless you work on it? That should bother you, actually. And so then it did. And I started chasing down this, like, why do the horses feel the same every time I work on them? Why is it the same patterns and what's going on? And the side effects that they were having. So head shaking syndrome, quite a few had this undiagnosed lameness in a forelimb. And it wouldn't block. They couldn't figure it out. There was no heat and swelling. There was nothing obvious. It was just every once in a while, they would just kind of come up three-legged. And then I started looking at like how the neck tied into the shoulder. And then I was looking at where the brachial plexus is on equines versus horses. Obviously, they don't have clavicles, so it's a different issue than what we have, but it's the same area. It's the same idea. And so I spent a whole weekend just really specifically working on these horses, stayed extra late. And I tried these different techniques that I do with the humans, and lo and behold, and the horses were three-legged and then they were fine, but then they were holding the changes a little bit longer. And then I started having the owners like really work with them on several horses at my personal ranch that had these things that I thought were potentially that. One had hind limb, so it was sciatica that was causing him. He was three-legged behind. The other ones were forelimb. And I did the same thing with all of them and it went away. And I was like, this is so cool. Yeah, and then I just basically was advertising, like, if anybody has an undiagnosed lameness, let me see your horse. Like I wasn't charging anything for a while. I just wanted to test these theories out to see, like, if you've gone through all the images and your poor vets have, they're scratching their heads and they're blocking out and they don't know what it is. Like, I don't know, let me take a peek and see. And yeah, it just kept working. So.
Do you find yourself these days working primarily then with the somatic nervous system?
I would say so. Yeah. That's kind of been where I've really taken my focus. Thankfully, all of last year, I was really training up a lot of other brilliant trainers and body workers. And so I have a lot of people that are out doing, like the typical rehabilitation things and the injuries and things like that. And for me lately, I've tried to just really stay in that zone and kind of talk about more, the nervous system and the relationship to the horses and how far removed we have come in the industry to what is natural to them and how to work within that realm. And so it's been a privilege to actually be able to step back a little bit and just talk about the things that I really want to talk about, like that.
Are you diving at all into the central pattern generators?
Ooh, I haven't done that too much yet. Is that something that you played with?
I'm in the Hanasomatic community. And one of the things we've been discussing within the equine side are these central pattern generators.
Ooh, I would love to nerd out with you about this.
So it's really Eleanor Cresswell. She's down here in Sonoma County. For those listeners who aren't familiar with central pattern generators, there are two within the horse, one in the front end, one in the hind end. And they are part of the somatic nervous system that controls movement. And so one of the somatic ideas is that if you go in and reset this pattern generator, you can get rid of lameness. And just wondering if you've played with that idea at all.
I haven't, but I'd be curious where they are because we have our brachial plexus, it's in the front end of the horse, and we have our lumbosacral plexus, which is in the hind end of the horse. And those are the two places that I operate out of. So this is brilliant. Okay.
But there's not a lot of research done so far on the equine central pattern generators. So
there's not a lot of research done on the things that are in like the actual brachial plexus and the lumbosacral plexus. There are not very many people that are talking about it. And there will be soon, which is good. We've got several people that have been doing a lot of necropsies on horses and showing, they're trying to get some data around actually showcasing the damage to the plexus itself, what the development of the horse looked like before they, got into the dissection. And I'm really excited, actually. In the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to start seeing some really cool, groundbreaking evidence to the things that we already know to be true. But, like we really need to get it out there. So I think it's going to be a really, really cool hit for the industry. And hopefully the somatic also comes along with it, because that'd just be so cool.
I should put you in touch with Alyssa and Eleanor.
Yes, I would like to be friends.
Because I think you'd love them.
Yep, sounds like it.
Switching gears a little bit, what do you wish horse owners knew about their horses' bodies?
How many do I have to limit this to?
Say it all.
Say everything. Oh God, we'd be up here all night. I would love for everybody to realize that it is unhealthy for a horse to have their ventral neck, their under neck, their brachiophalicus muscle, if you really want to be specific, in any amount of tension, especially at rest. And so if there is something going on within your horse and your body worker cannot release that muscle, there is some kind of underlying pathology that's going on. So that's a clue in for pre-lameness before they even go lame. If it's something that's in their foot or their neck, their back, all kinds of things. It doesn't really matter what the pathology is. One of the first places that you'll see that seize up is in that ventral neck. And then, that also seizes up with incorrect training. And I say that loosely, not in like the training specifically is incorrect, but the horse's relationship to contact and connection is. And so if you have a horse that's really bracy on the halter, if you have a horse that's really bracy in the bridle, it doesn't matter if it's a bit or bitless, brace is brace. It will condition the horse to have that muscle seized up. That ventral neck, that muscle specifically, is what I call the horse's flight muscle. And so it seizes up when the horse is in a state of stress. Well, if you're trying to develop the horse's body in any good fashion, but particularly if you're trying to develop the horse's mind, especially if you have horses that are especially spooky or maybe even on the aggressive side, if you can signal for that muscle to let go, and you can kind of work within that parameter and all of the things that you're doing and checking in with it, kind of like it's your weather vane, you can really access the horse's ability to tap into their parasympathetic system much easier. And obviously that calls for the humans to also be balanced and be in a good state, right? So that we're providing for a good, safe environment for our horses to also co-regulate and find that safety. But that's probably the number one thing I try to educate people on the most, because it is a absolute game changer for your horse.
So looking into the future, if every horse had a correctly developed thoracic sling, and if every horse's nerves impingements were released, what then becomes possible?
Oh my gosh, it would be so much better. If horses had proper thoracic slings, they wouldn't have the huge number of injuries and pathologies that we see. So their athleticism would be through the roof. Their soundness would be through the roof. The limitations between the horses and humans in any competitive world that you want to go to would be nothing. I mean, they would have no limit. And then, like I said, in order to really get a horse developed to that nature, it requires the human to have that good relationship with their horse, right? Like that's what makes it so tricky. And I don't want listeners to be like, I have a great relationship. I'm sure you have a great relationship with your horse. It's not like that. It means being really accountable within yourself to make sure that you are not ever going out and like trying to work with your horse in any kind of rigidity, or I have a time constraint, like I have 30 minutes to get this done kind of situation. It's a different style of relationship than I think we're allowed to have usually, even with other humans and in our day-to-day realm. And so it's really quite foreign, I think, to most of us. I know learning this path and really committing to this as much as I have has softened me substantially as a human, as a mother. Yeah, it's just a very different relationship. So I don't say that being like, oh, you guys, if your horse doesn't have a thoracic sling, you don't have a good, I'm sure you have a good relationship with your horse. But yeah, it's a different thing. So if that happened, and if that was what's going on in the horse community, my God, like I would say humanity as a whole must be just a completely better picture. Like what a cool thing that would be for humans to have the space and the capacity in their lives to be able to do that.
What do you think it will take to make that change?
In terms of training systems, if we take around the global view of it, which is in our day-to-day lives, we're often not allowed to have the kind of softness and patience and lack of, any attachment to outcome that we must bring to the horses. That's not usually something we're allowed. So without that huge problem, which we can work with and we can do, the more, micro scale problem that we have within the industry is that there's a lot of us now, I think, that are really, the whole mindful horsemanship movement has been huge. There are so many more of us that are willing to do this, but there are a lot of still older training systems at play, all the way up through the Olympics, where we're seeing people work their horses and ride their horses in a way that is outdated at best. It is not conducive to any of the things that we're talking about. And they win in their, in their respective disciplines and a lot of things. And so you'd have to change the metric of what people are looking at for success. Are they looking at, are the horses going out and winning, and are they obedient, and are they doing what I'm wanting them to do when I want them to do it? Or is the metric, we have really sound, healthy horses with bodies and mind who have the ability to say, no, I don't want to do this, or no, this doesn't feel good. And you're going to listen and be okay with it. Now that's a big shift.
It is. And there's some out there who say the two are completely incompatible.
I don't think that they're completely incompatible. I mean, I will tell you that there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there, right? And they'll throw down and this is my stance and this is your stance and blah, 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 blah. And you can try to reason with them all day long. You can't reason with them. But I have had many, many, many conversations with many different equine professionals who are on absolute opposite ends of the spectrum of me on how we view, at this point in my life, and on how we view things. And I will tell you that there has not been a single one of those conversations where we have not brought a horse into the arena, may or may not have had a beer or two, and talked like humans, face to face, looking at the horse, playing with the horse, showcasing our things, and not come to the same conclusions where we completely agreed. There's not been a single time that I've done that has not happened. And so I fully think that it's possible. I think people just need to pull their heads out of their bums a little bit and be open to having these conversations.
The beer too must have helped.
I'm sure that there's a little bit of that. I mean, I'm surprisingly very, very easily to get along with, and I understand other people's sides very well. One of the things that helps me in these conversations is, for the most part, I mean, my mom was Native, and so I was raised with very Native American horsemanship, and not even just horsemanship, but just Native American ideals of connection and spirituality. And so I've always been deeply spiritually connected to the beings that I'm working with. That's always been the case. And I was also trained with top trainers who, yelled and screamed at you and belittled you until you were just a tiny little crumpled up crying pool underneath your horse, being like, I'm not good enough to breathe. As a trainer and as a professional rider, I mean, I totally have done horrible manipulative things to my horses. I had a bit in my thing. I still have it. Actually, pulled it out, showed my husband. He was mortified. He was like, oh my God, did you steal that from somebody? I was like, nope, this was mine. We called it the bitch bit, and it got put on horses that decided to run through, the client's hands. I did that. That was me that I did. I designed and sold my own bungee rigging system. I lunged all the horses in the Pessoas and the side reins because at the time, that's what I thought was correct, because that's what I was trained and that's what I was told. And there was some metric of success that I was like, oh yeah, that. And as I've evolved through the years and understood all of these different implications, I'm like, oh, wow, that's really bad. But because I've done it, and because I very, very clearly remember why I thought all of these things were a good idea, I can sit with these people and be like, totally get it. Totally get it. Let's share some stories about that. Also, this is why I don't think it works anymore. Let me show you. And then I show them. And then once you get to demo something with somebody, we'd pull out a super hot horse that was, for all intents and purposes, quite violent and aggressive. And I'm like, now we have two different tracks here. We have many, but we'll go with two. We could throw the horse in the round pen or throw the horse in the lunge lane, and we could just lunge the ever living shit out of this horse until it finally calms down and, and then breathes and respects us. And we've moved its feet and we've changed its direction and we've done all the things, right? Or I can stand here with a target and a cookie, and I can work with him on a posture that will put him in a parasympathetic state without ever throwing him in circles. It's going to piss off the nerve. That's actually what's making him quite angry. And B, without ever stressing out his muscles by making him super sweaty. And also, C, I don't want to work in that many circles, man. I'm too lazy for this. So let's just, give this a shot. I'll stand here with this horse, and it will take no more than 5 to 10 minutes. And the horse is licking and chewing and yawning and so happy. And they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, I know, but this is how the nervous system works. So we have an option. We can do it that way, which I used to do. And it's very tiring. And it, has a lot of, now what I understand to be contraindications and potentially harmful. Or we can do this thing that is not nearly as adrenaline based, but by God, it works well. And that horse is so happy. And not only did this work well, but this horse now doesn't see me as a predator that's trying to chase it down and demand its, attention. It sees me as somebody that stood there and loved them and was like, it's okay that you want to kill me. Can we think about this other way? And then I got to help them maybe for the first time, and who knows, drop into a parasympathetic state. That's got to feel so cool. That's how I handle these things.
Dovetailing off of that, what do you envision for the future? Let's say you've done all the things everyone in the world is using, balance through movement method. What comes next for you?
Oh, hell, man, I would just be sitting back playing with my ponies at that point. I get to ride my own horses, be having fun, out riding horses with my kids. That's all I need. No, in terms of like what comes next and for the industry or for this thing, what my long game goal is to eventually make it so, especially, I mean, it would be great if we could do this to the lower levels, but things tend to trickle down. But if we could at least make it for the upper level competitions, for there to be a scoring system on development for the horses that go through there. I'm just going to keep campaigning this until I'm not here anymore. But say, for instance, you had a horse that went into, we'll use 3-day eventing, for instance, because I think that that's a good one to start for rider safety. But say we have a horse that's going in, for the Olympics, and they're riding into this crazy, they're going to go to their cross country, they go out for their job, they're totally sound, nothing's wrong with them, vets clear them, everything's good to go. But they really don't have a supraspinatus, which means it doesn't have a subclavius, and it doesn't really have a trapezius either. And you're looking at these crazy shoulder lines, and you're like, there's no cushion there for impact. The horse has weak triceps, weak quadriceps, so it has weak stifles. And so you can look at this developmental scoring sheet and go, wow, the horses are really struggling in these areas in their musculature, which means they're way higher chances for rotational falls. So now we've got rider safety, we've got equine welfare. Because when they land a fence and they don't have that cushion and that nerve fires, it shuts off the blood flow down to that limb. So now we have numbness and tingling down a galloping athlete going into death-defying jumps, right? That's not good. We see the horses in the jumper rings that are being completely psychotic, that they have to, oh, they're just excited for their jobs. No, they're not. They know that that's going to hurt like shit when they land. And I can tell you that because I can see all of the nerve implications from the lack of development on their body. And so if we can develop a scoring system that's just purely based off of development, because we know now we know what's going on underneath that. It's not biased, because muscle development is muscle development. You can't really argue when you can see the scapula. So if we can do that, people would not be able to drug or cheat their way through the system, and they would not be able to ride these horses in massive amounts of compensation. Even though the horses are succeeding and they're winning and they're doing well, they would just be told to go home and go home and go home until they've done it right. And then they can come with an actually developed horse. And if we actually set that as the rule for whether or not they would be able to compete at those levels, everybody would have to rise.
Yeah.
That's my sword that I'm packing.
What do you think it'll take to get there?
Unfortunately, I think it's going to take more injuries. I think it's going to take the science that I said is coming out in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think once people can actually, when it's really published and well known what different development looks like on the implications on what's going on with the nerves beneath the skin and these horses that we're doing these, dissections on, I think that's going to change a lot of the game. Just the more people campaigning this stuff and the more healthy riders that are going out there too, right? So again, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have upper level horses that have been doing these things, that have been doing all of, not even just my program, there's other programs out there that are great with this too, but actually good, mindful, balanced, developed horses that have been through these levels long enough that now they're going out and they are slaying and they're safe and they're not falling and they're not lame and they're not drugged up and their riders are happy and they're super calm throughout the competition. And the more people see horses like that, especially doing well, I think that is also what's going to change it, which is why, I really try to keep working with competition horses myself. I mean, I have my homebred that I'm fully planning on going out and competing on again, because now I know better. We've got to walk our talk a little bit. So
for sure.
Yeah.
If you could go back and give yourself any piece of advice as you were starting down this path with creating balance through movement method, what would you say?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I would do anything different. I would probably just say to buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride. Yeah, and just remind myself that, to meet everybody where they're at, for sure. I definitely wish, my only regret on anything is that I didn't know a lot of what I know now sooner, just for my own ponies, but that's okay. And it is hard. That's really hard. There's not a day that goes by, and it's not like in a bad way. Like, I'm not sitting and beating myself up constantly, but there is not a day that goes by where I'm not like, really wish I knew that. Really wish that would have had, or I would have had this skill set now, or like that totally comes up all the time. And, that's what keeps me motivated. Like, this job will never be boring. I could have all the money in the world and never have to work a day in my life, and I would still do this. I would never stop doing this.
Great. Well, for the listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Celeste and her work, including the Balance Through Movement Method, visit www.balancethroughmovementmethod.com. And for more information about our host, Meredith Crawford, visit her site, www.thelab.horse. Thanks for listening.